The Quiet Agenda, a short story. The narrator has a realisation about a housemate years ago. 20-something years before this, I was studying property law at the start of one of my many lacklustre careers and was living in a share house with two nice women, Nora and Stephanie, with neither of whom I was even remotely romantic. The house was a drafty dingle, and the heating didn't heat, and the winter times were woolly, but it was spacious and cheap. Stephanie was the older, a hairdresser with a brand new divorce to prove it, who was tidily titular Mrs. Stephanie Hayes, and still wore her ring to ward off any interlopers. Nora Pedalta was the younger and neat, but as boring as long division. She worked, she explained, in accounts at the Commonwealth Inventory Office, where the government kept track of things like staplers and photocopy machines. One day, however, Stephanie, newly single, formed a zip in her step and took off her ring, and by then I knew her well enough to wonder if it was because of a gentleman. "It is," she said, as silly as a teenager. "His name is Clint Creswell. I met him in the leafy park one lunchtime." Not long after, Clint comes around. He is carrying roses. He's wearing that aftershave that is supposed to turn middle-aged women into lumps of butter. He shook my hand and told me he worked in cars. He seemed like a car man. Nora came and went with sallow purpose through the chilly house. She had a solid smile but used it sparingly, arriving home from work, not saying much, and going to her room to be boring all alone. She would sometimes jiggle me some kitchen banter, and she could converse with wit about the weather, but I would otherwise describe her as unobtrusive. Before too long, of course, Clint becomes a fixture. He starts staying over semi-regularly, and there he is at breakfast. I have no romantic angle, as I say, and it is almost cute to see Stephanie swept along. Clint, anyway, is domestic and doesn't loiter unnecessarily, going off to work in cars every morning he stayed over. And yet, I begin to think, he seems unusually curious regarding Nora. He does loiter, quite unnecessarily, if Nora is around, and he likes to engage her casual attention. She tells him about the ins and outs of the Commonwealth Inventory Office, and he pretends to be fascinated. One day, while he was waiting for Stephanie to fandangle her hair, they were on their way out to a concert, he asked me what I knew of this Nora. "She's quiet, isn't she?" he said. "She is," I agreed. "Is she going out with anyone?" he then asked. "Not that I know of," I said, although I related that she sometimes went away for the weekends, and whether there was a young man on the end of that or not, I didn't know. "Where is she from?" he then asked. "Nora? Brisbane. I think she grew up in Brisbane. Why?" "She's got a slight accent. I thought she might have been born overseas." "Not that I know. Pedalta. What is that, Slovakian?" My knowledge of Nora was appropriately meagre, but Clint took other occasions to pry. "Does she ever have any visitors?" he asked one time, thinking it odd that she never seemed to. I pleaded that I never watched out for them if she did. Then, one night, very late, firmly in the AMs, I was rustling myself a study snack when I encountered Clint creeping in the hallway. It was one of those weekends when Nora was away. Clint was staying over. Stephanie was in her slumbers. What was Clint, in his dressing gown, doing coming out of Nora's room? "What are you doing, Clint?" I asked him in the darkness. "Nothing," he says. "I was going to the bathroom." I examined his sincerity. "What were you doing in Nora's room?" He laughs. I wasn't in Nora's room. Why would I be in Nora's room? That was a good question, but I wasn't going to ask it too forthrightly in the AMs, and both Clint and I went back to our beds. Did I mention it to Stephanie? I didn't need to. It was just after this that Stephanie lost her zip. She arrived home disgruntled. When I asked about Clint, she said, "Don't ask about Clint. He came around a few more times, but had lost his dazzle for the divorcee." It seemed to me like a standard passing. MILF meets Carman wows MILF, MILF sees through Carman leaves MILF. It unfolded with quiet drama and was all over in a few short months. Given 20 years of reflection, Clint Creswell, whoever he might have been, was, I think, a smooth operator. He just accidentally met Stephanie in the leafy park one lunchtime. But it was really Nora he was noting. I realise this now, 20 years later, as I'm seeing Nora Podolta on the national news. Nora Podolta, as boring as long division, who works for the National Secretariat for Intelligence and Surveillance, and who, I now realise, thinking it over again, never worked for the Commonwealth Inventory Office, keeping track of staplers and photocopy machines. Her father was a spook. In fact, a major spook. The sort of spook who spooks prime ministers for a living. It was nearly 2 cold winter times I shared the house with Nora and Stephanie. Eventually, Stephanie bought herself a poodle. It drove me crazy, so I found somewhere else to live and crash out in property law. Nora was ever regular throughout. I never saw her flustered. She kept a perfect cover. She kept a quiet agenda. I never guessed a thing. But there was Clint Creswell, the supposed car man, with his roses and his aftershave. According to the news, there are over 15 different intelligence agencies with a combined staff of over 8,000. They live among us.